going to be welcoming from the Third Mutual, Mr. Bert Moldau. Good morning, Mr. Moldau.
Good morning to you, Connie.
Nice to have you on the show.
Well, I'm getting accustomed to it.
And we're happy about that.
Good.
I hear that you're going to give us a little bit of an update on the Third Mutual today.
Yes, I am.
This is on the Architectural Standards and Controls Committee.
Yes.
Yes?
It's, this is a new committee, by the way.
Oh.
But it's an old committee, and I'll explain that.
Okay.
We have been running long meetings for the M&C, where architecture and control was buried. And we said, what can we do to shorten meetings? Okay, and what we did is we looked at and said, well, architecture and control is a good thing to pull out of that committee and form a separate committee. So we did, and of course, it was my recommendation that was made that did this, so therefore I became chairman.
Of course, because it was your idea.
Right, so the first thing I did is I went in and I reread the CC&Rs, okay?
Yes.
That's what, condition?
Yeah. Conditions and criteria?
Yeah.
Criteria, conditions of...
I'm so accustomed to CC and R.
We all are,
I know
aren't we?
R is restrictions and one is conditions, covenants. First C, covenants, conditions, and restrictions.
Yes.
Okay, and lo and behold, I found out that if you go in there, it tells you that there is a separate architecture committee.
Oh, well.
And there was one up until the early 2000s, and then it got put into M&C. And this was a logical move to pull it back out again.
Yes.
Okay, so here we are with our own architecture control and standards committee.
And our chairman.
Yeah, and it's a good thing we did, because in order to save staff time,
Yes.
We recently have started to say, well, how can we help staff get more time?
Yes.
Less time preparing to present us with what's going on.
Yes.
And what we did is we looked again and said, well, why don't we have the M&C meetings every other month? Why do we have it every month? Because really, there was no reason that we could not get the information we wanted in the interim period.
Yes.
Okay, and convey this information to the community on an every other month basis. Because most of the time that people come to us at the M&C had to do with architecture and control issues.
Yes.
So they have their opportunity every month to present their arguments, okay, and resolve their issues without having to go to an M&C meeting. So here we are. And it was interesting. I had picked this topic because I think the community in general really does not know enough. And they must think, boy, that architecture committee, they're so hard-nosed. They don't want to allow us to do anything. And that's the farthest from the truth.
It's so true. That
Okay.
it really is.
We bend over backwards, but they don't realize that we have legal restrictions.
Yes.
CC&Rs being one. But if we deviate too far, and suddenly somebody says, a neighbor says, oh, I don't like what you're doing there, okay, and he hires a lawyer, we find ourselves with a lawsuit. So we have to balance this issue of legal restrictions,
Yep.
and there are other restrictions. The state imposes restrictions on us. The David Sterling Act imposes restrictions on us. So we have restrictions all over the place we have to deal with, and sometimes they conflict.
True, and you have to interpret all of those conflicts, those challenges.
So there we are. Okay, so
Yes.
what we try to do is find a balance. For instance, we now are at the point where we're saying if a neighbor complains and has a valid complaint, if it impacts on the value of their property,
Yes.
okay, then it's not fair. And we would not allow a variation from the standards. So that's one issue. But there are times when a neighbor wants to build out. Now, when they're going to build out, they're building out on common area.
Yes.
And what is common area? Common area is that area in the community that is held in common and owned in common by every member of the community.
Yes.
So if you look at the state rules, okay, one place they say that you cannot do anything with that common area unless you had 100% of the people owning
Agreeing,
that
yes.
agreeing. Okay. Well, 6,102 units.
Oh my
6,102 owners.
Oh
Can
my.
you imagine the cost involved to get the approval to allow somebody to build on common area? Well, we back away from that and we're saying, let's look at this from a more practical standpoint. I can give you an example. We went out this week, okay, and there was a unit.
Yes.
And they wanted to extend their patio. Okay, and we looked at where they were.
Yes.
There was no neighbor on
Oh.
3 sides completely open in the back. And we said, nobody sees this. Okay, why would we want to restrict that person from increasing the value of their home, which overall increases the value of Laguna Woods property?
Yes.
So we made that decision. But we have other conditions where we have actually had lawyers come in because one of the neighbors was objecting,
Right.
and therefore they would threaten a lawsuit. And what are you going to do? We don't want a lawsuit.
No.
We're not.
We have really good neighbors
It
here.
could be very expensive.
Yes.
Okay. So we try to avoid that.
Yes.
So it's a balancing act, and the committee tries very hard, really does, tries very hard to allow people to extend their property, to improve on their property. But on the other hand, you know, the people have an obligation. They have an obligation that if they want to do something to that property, they have to come to us first.
They do. Because if they spend that time, that expenditure of time and perhaps money on fleshing out the idea of expanding the property, without speaking to you first, they might feel really bad about what they've already done.
Well, we may have to require them to take it out.
Oh, yes, that is true. If they do go ahead and build something
If they go ahead and
without
build something on common
approval.
area, okay, or even there's another aspect of common area, and that's called exclusive common area,
Yes.
okay? And when the community was built, the architecture layout of the community provided for certain areas in the community that they called exclusive use.
Yes.
And that says nobody else has the possibility of using that area.
Right.
It's tucked away, okay? And so we have some latitude with exclusive use.
Well, that's good.
And we do.
Yes.
Okay. But when it comes to common area, you know, we've got to be very strict.
It's true, and the community is laid out so beautifully. There is so much open space.
You got it.
And it seems like it's just free and open. And you think, why can't I just extend out that way? It's hard to understand that there are laws that govern those open areas.
And there could be 2 units, identical.
Oh, yes.
Okay, but not identical with regard to the plot and where they're
that's right.
situated.
That is true.
So in one case, you know, you can approve it. The other case, you can't.
So that's why it's always good when you have the ideas to make improvements, to come and speak to the Architectural Standards and Controls Committee first.
Absolutely. Take the time, even if, you know, it's questionable. And it's interior as well, because interior, you're looking at potential structural changes.
Well, that is true.
And we have got to make a determination as to whether or not that structural change is going to be sufficient, you know, whether it's going to be strong enough,
Yes.
because of,
Well,
we
we
don't
do
want,
have
we
the
don't want your
earthquake-
unit collapsing over your head.
We have the Earthquake Task Force meeting this week.
Well,
so-
that's true too. You know, it was interesting. I was going to talk about this. I sent in my notes like Tuesday.
Yes.
And if anybody read Thursday's paper, the Globe,
Yes, what did it
Lucy
say?
Falk wrote an article in the Letters to the Editor. And it starts out, we live in a common interest development with rules, regulations which apply to owners, leases alike. We also have a compliance department which ensures said policies are followed. Owners, residents planning on making alterations, be it construction or landscaping, need to fill out applications
Yes.
describing said projects, and these need to be approved by the departments as well as the neighbors affected by such alterations. And it was just, she went on and pointed out how important it is. And I thought it was
is.
terrific. And here's a resident.
Who understands
Lucy.
the rules.
Bless you, Lucy.
Thank you, Lucy.
Yeah.
And putting it in writing, in print.
It was good. It was really good.
That's wonderful.
So we are continuing to do what we can.
Yes.
We're rewriting certain things right now in terms of the rules and regulations.
Oh,
You know, we find that there were so many conflicts within the documents, the
Yes.
rules, that we had to deal with this, and we're in the process right now of trying to straighten that out.
my goodness.
The other thing we're looking at, you know, there are people who don't even know what it is to live in a common interest development or an HOA.
This is a new one for a lot of people.
They don't even know that that there are things called CC&Rs. And that's the bad part of it. Okay, and what we're looking at, and I've tried to raise this point, we've got to get to these people before they decide to buy.
True.
Let them know, you know, that these things exist, there are restrictions, and they're restrictions for good reason.
Yes.
I mean, why would you want to live in a planned community and then have somebody build a tower on their house
With no plan.
with no plan? You know, like a sore thumb sticking up there.
Right. And that's what's so beautiful about Laguna Woods Village is it was planned so well.
Oh.
And now, for how many years? how many decades has it been in this beautiful plan with the rolling hills and the open spaces? And
Right.
that's all because it's very carefully watched and construed.
I mean, you look at the CIDs, the common area developments that are going up today.
Yes.
And the houses are, what, 2 feet apart? And,
I-
no land?
You're singing my song there, Mr. Monell. I have a 5-year-old son, and I have this much of a backyard for him to play in.
Right. And that's what makes this place really unique.
That's
and
right.
we want to preserve it. We still want to maintain that. But at the same time, we don't want to restrict people who would like to improve on their house and expand the area that their house has if it's not going to impact
It's
their
true.
neighbors and anybody else.
And sometimes it does impact the neighbors. In the case of dry rot or with earthquake retrofitting, and sometimes parking considerations.
Yes. That's another whole issue. We have a separate parking committee now, but it's a subcommittee.
Very good.
That's really, we have to find parking spaces for our people.
Yes.
You know, 50 years ago, people moved in, they had 1 car.
Oh, true.
Now we got them where they got 3 cars.
And their cars are kind of big sometimes.
Yes.
I've
big
seen the
difference.
SUVs driving around are a little big. So we need a little bit more consideration for
And
parking.
that's why CC&Rs. You don't want to have people parking their cars on your lawn or on their lawn.
No, no. Or in front of your building or in front of your residence where you just don't want to be seeing their automobile
Right.
at all times. But tell me a little bit about the earthquake retrofitting or the earthquake considerations that you have in.
Well, I'm not a member on that committee or subcommittee.
All right.
Okay, they are meeting actively, and as I understood it primarily, it was to make a determination with regard to insurance.
Yes.
You know, we're self-insured, and that's different from most places. Okay, and we have set up an absolute separate fund, a
Wonderful.
reserve fund,
Yes.
to $10 million, which, by the way, is the deductible. If you take out earthquake insurance,
Wow.
okay, the deductible is $10 million. That
Is
you're not going to get anything until
No, that's
for the first 10 million.
right.
So we said, you know, why don't we self-insure? And so we built a reserve account. It's not quite at 10 million yet.
No.
But it's going over 8 million this year, which
That
is
is
significant.
wonderful. And that shows the kind of thought that's gone into the planning and the running of Laguna Woods Village. Now tell me a little bit about the dry rot concerns.
Okay, with dry rot, we are really encountering a major, major problem. This building, what, we got over 2,100 buildings in Third,
Yes.
okay, and they're wood construction buildings.
Yes.
And if you get water leaks, or primarily our problems really were with the external
Yes.
wood.
Yes.
Okay, and dry rot is like a disease. It's like a virus. There's a spore that can float from point to point, and once it is established, once the conditions are right, it begins to work away at the wood.
It does. And so that's when residents notice the dry rot on their residence or even a neighbor, they can come to your committee
Yes.
and talk about how to address that problem.
In fact, we had one this past week, okay,
Yes.
with a trellis, and the individual
They're
wanted,
beautiful, those trellises.
and they wanted to remove the trellis
Yes.
because there was dry rot.
Yes.
And that's something, you know, to our advantage, because otherwise we've got to do the repair. And once the dry rot is there, the spores are there, and the spores are spreading.
Through the air.
And
That's right.
for that reason, Third recently, okay, instituted a policy where we said no more external wood.
Well, all right.
So there are other materials that can be used. And if we can eliminate this dry rot occurring on the surface of the building, we can minimize the amount of spores and ultimately get rid of this thing.
Well, there are wonderful products that look just like wood, and they behave like wood, but they're not wood, and so
Right.
they don't invite the dry rot. And of course, there's concrete, stone, all sorts of products that can
That's
be
right.
used.
There's
And-
aluminum, there's PVC.
Yes,
So that's what we're looking toward.
and they're worth their cost of construction
Oh,
as well.
absolutely.
And so you are an expert in kind of the costs and means of those products, and you can counsel residents on the best way to proceed.
And, you know, we're not only protecting them, we're protecting their neighbors. Because
Yes.
again, these spores do travel.
They do travel. One day it's your trellis, the day it's somebody else's trellis. We don't want that to happen. Well, thank you for being with us today, sir. It's so
My
good
pleasure.
to talk to you about this, and I'm glad about this new committee being started up again.
Again, right. We learn the hard way.
Yes, and we're going to learn a little bit more as well. Our next guest will be coming on just after this break. It is Eileen Ordway from Laguna Woods Village Library and Historical Society. So stay with us after the break.
Thank you.